Well, greetings and welcome, everyone. We're back to Unit 4. This is Sections 7 and 8. We are looking at some of the significant battles of the American Revolution. Why are these things kind of important? We're not going to spend a lot of time on individual battles, but I do want to look at just a couple very, very quickly because they're things you should know about them. So we're going to just go ahead and jump right in and look at these significant battles. We are also looking at, first of all, Trenton. This is in the winter of 1776. So we have declared independence back in July 4th, 1776, was when that document was signed by the founding fathers. So we are now not fighting for our rights as Englishmen. Instead, Americans are fighting for their freedom, for their independence from British rule. And the Continental Congress is ruling the colonies at this time. Now, they are not going to be a very effective government, but they are trying to just kind of hold everything together until hopefully the war can be won. Now, in all honesty, the war has not been going very well, the actual fighting. First of all, December 25th is actually Christmas night. And this was kind of a plan by General Washington. And he is going to take his men and attack the town of Trenton, New Jersey. Trenton, New Jersey was the winter camp of the Hessians. Remember the dreaded and hated Hessians. These are those foreign German mercenaries hired by Britain to fight. These guys were kind of feared among the Americans because they were so brutal and efficient. Now, what makes this particular battle somewhat unique, not necessarily why it's important, but unique, is that European armies rarely ever fought in the winter. Instead, they went into what was called winter camp, and they usually were in winter camp until spring. So anywhere between October, November, and probably April, you're not doing a whole lot of fighting. You are encamped and taking care of resupplying, re-equipping, things like that, but you are not actually campaigning, trying to fight a battle. And Washington knows this, and he knows that these Hessians are camped for the winter in Trenton. They're staying in people's homes. He knows they are there, and he decides he's going to gamble. He needs a victory. Remember, things have not been going well for Washington and his army. And so he really feels like, okay, this is a big-time gamble. So what if we launch a surprise attack on these dreaded, feared Hessians? What if, on the night of Christmas of all times, the Americans attack across an ice-choked river in the middle of a snowstorm in winter at night? Now think about that. That's a lot of potential for something to go wrong. It's at night, first of all. Guys, these people do not have GPS locations. They do not have digital maps. They do not have walkie-talkies or cell phones to help them stay in contact with each other. So at night, you have a potential for your units to get very, very lost. We are doing this in winter, so it's going to be cold. I already said it's in the middle of a snow and ice storm. The river they have to cross is the Delaware River, which was quite wide at this point. It's much wider than the Mississippi is here in our location. And so you're trying to cross this ice-choked river in the middle of winter at night with the element of surprise, because you don't want the Hessians to know you're coming, and be victorious. And that's going to be very, very difficult. But Washington and his men take the Hessians completely by surprise at sunrise the next morning. It kind of went off exactly as Washington had hoped. The Hessians were caught asleep. They were sleeping in a little late. Maybe they had celebrated a little too much on Christmas Day. And ultimately, the Hessian commander, a guy by the name of Colonel Rall, he has to surrender his troops. He has to give up. And this is a big blow to the Hessians, but it is a big victory, as you might imagine, for the Americans. Remember, these are the guys everyone feared. And now the Americans have a victory against the Hessians. And you can see the numbers there. I'm not going to repeat them, but you can see it was quite the lopsided victory. Okay, so this is big. So why is Trenton important? Why is this a big deal? Guys, this is important because, first of all, it really, really gives the Americans something to be proud of. It really rallies the American spirit. And these people are so happy for Washington that it actually gains him new recruits. Several thousand new men volunteer for the Continental Army as a result of Trenton. So this is a good recruiting tool too. You can always recruit new men when you're winning a war. People are more inclined to join up if that's the case. So Trenton, the big deal is it rallies the American spirit and gains Washington new soldiers. So pretty big deal. Now, you should probably be pretty familiar with this image. I think you've seen this before. This is a painting done many years later by an artist by the name of Emanuel Leutze, and it is entitled Washington Crossing the Delaware. And it's showing the hero, George Washington, here in the front of his little boat. He's got his leg all cocked up on the side, and he's holding his cape against his body. He's crossing the icy Delaware. And while this is a very heroic portrayal of the Americans crossing the Delaware, especially of Washington, you got the guy holding the American flag behind him, of course. And guys, this is a great painting. It's one of my all-time favorites, but it is widely, widely inaccurate. First of all, remember, it was the middle of the night when they crossed. It was in the 1, 2, 3 a.m. range when they crossed the Delaware. They didn't all cross at one time. As you can see going off into the distance, back through here, we have a lot of, you can see other boats crossing the Delaware all at once. That's not how it happened. In fact, Washington was one of the last ones to get to his, about halfway through, transferring all of his men to the other side of the river was when Washington arrived. It was the middle of the night. It was in the middle of a snowstorm. And here, in fact, you can kind of see the sun beginning to break through the clouds and shine on the American army and highlight them. And I always like to say there is no one in the Continental Army who would allow someone as important and someone as respected as Washington to stand up in a boat as you're crossing an ice-choked river. What happens if your boat hits one of these big chunks of ice? Your commanding general goes head over heels into the icy water. If you get him out, he's got hypothermia and he's going to die. So no one's going to allow Washington to stand up like this. And quite honestly, I don't think Washington was that big of a fool. I don't think he would have done that on his own anyway. So not accurate at all, but a very heroic, romanticized version of how the American army crosses the Delaware River. Washington crossing the Delaware, Emanuel Leutze, very cool painting. Next up, we have a short video here. It's from a video series made about 15 years ago called The Crossing, and it's about Washington crossing the Delaware. And this is the clip of them actually attacking Trenton. I'm going to let you watch that on your own time. It's about an 8-minute clip. Well worth it, but if I can get it to skip to the next slide. There we go. So our next battle that I think it's important that you know something about because of its importance to the war is the Battle of Saratoga. Now, the important thing is there's not just one Battle of Saratoga. It was actually a series of small battles. So we're kind of encapsulating that all into one thing here. There was a plan by the British to split the colonies. Have you ever heard the old saying, divide and conquer? Well, that's what the British are trying to do. They're trying to divide the colonies in half and kind of split off New England from the rest of the colonies. And this was by a British general by the name of John Burgoyne. And this was his plan. He expected the other British generals to kind of buy into it and help him out as he attacked down the Hudson River Valley in New York State from Canada. The problem is the plan fails miserably. No one comes to his aid. His army's floundering around in the wilderness. He has 36 wagons just of his own personal possessions, including a wine cellar, as well as clothing for his lady friend. And the Americans know where the army is in this wilderness. They're chopping down trees in the path of the army. That the trees have to be chopped up and cleared before the army can pass on. We're talking constant guerrilla attacks by the Americans. And what I mean by guerrilla attack, this is where guys hide behind trees and rocks and take a couple of shots at the British and then run away before the British can really respond. And so this was a really rough campaign for Burgoyne and the British Army. They were months late getting to Saratoga where they wanted to go. They're pinned down, and finally Burgoyne is forced to surrender his entire army, or what was left of it at that point. The really big impact here, the really important thing that I think you should probably know, it's not that, is that this is a turning point of the war. First of all, there we go. Get me out of the way. This removes an entire British army. So we have several thousand British soldiers, a little less than 10,000, that are completely gone. We don't have to worry about them anymore. The second and the most important thing about Saratoga is that France, seeing this victory at Saratoga, decides to become America's ally. This is what really causes that alliance to take shape. And that is going to bring money, it's going to bring weapons, it's going to bring soldiers all onto the side of the Americans. This is a huge, huge thing. And this winds up being the turning point of the war. Now, you guys have heard the phrase turning points before, and that's where it's kind of a pivot point, if you will. It's where things begin to change from one side to the other. So far, this has not been going the best for the Americans, but once Saratoga happens, we stood up to the British ourselves, we've won a victory, and now the French are coming to America's aid. And so this really becomes a huge turning point. From here on out, yeah, the Americans will lose a couple battles here and there. But from here on out, it's pretty much going to be the British trying to survive the war. And so that makes this a really significant point in the war. And I think at this point, we're going to end this video. And we're going to have one more video that looks at the very last of the reading, sections about 9 through 11. And so if you have questions on anything you've seen here in Trenton and Saratoga, please let me know, and I'll be glad to get back to you. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, have a good day.